A 73-year-old man from Ohio named Thomas walked into his doctor's office for a routine checkup and walked out with a number that stopped him cold. His fasting glucose was 142. His physician used the word pre-diabetes. Thomas drove home in silence that afternoon, and over the following 2 weeks, he made 3 specific changes to his daily routine. 14 days later, his fasting glucose was 102, 40 points lower, no medication, no extreme diet, no gym membership. And when I looked closely at exactly what Thomas did and why it worked at the biological level, what I found was not surprising to me as someone who has spent years studying metabolic health. What was surprising was how simple, how precise, and how replicable his approach actually was. That is what this video is about. Not a list of general tips, not vague advice about eating better and moving more, a specific documented protocol and the science that explains why every single piece of it works, particularly for people over 60, whose metabolic biology is meaningfully different from that of younger adults. Before I walk you through what Thomas did, I want to leave you with a question that I will answer fully by the end of this video. When Thomas's doctor told him his fasting glucose was elevated, she also told him something that he did not fully understand at the time, and that most patients never think to ask about. She said that the fasting number, the one you get on a lab result after an overnight fast, is only part of the story, that what happens to blood sugar throughout the day, after every meal, is often more clinically significant than the baseline morning reading. There is a name for this, glycemic variability, and understanding it changes everything about how you interpret food choices, movement, and sleep. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what it means, and you will see how each of Thomas's 3 changes targeted it directly. I have spent years reviewing clinical research on metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, and nutritional intervention in older adults. The biology of blood sugar regulation changes substantially after 60. Muscle mass declines, which reduces the body's primary site of glucose disposal. Insulin receptor sensitivity shifts. Pancreatic beta cell function becomes less robust. This means that what works for a 40-year-old does not always translate, and it means that targeted, age-specific strategies matter enormously. What Thomas did, whether he knew it or not, aligned precisely with what the research supports for his age group. Before we dive in, if you're finding this useful, take 2 seconds right now, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a video, and give this a thumbs up. It genuinely helps more people like you find this content. And drop a comment below. Tell me what country you're watching from. I'd love to know where our community is tuning in from around the world. Hold on a second. Before we go any further, I've put something together for you. It's called the Glucose Paradox. It's a free guide on blood sugar and diabetes, and you can grab it for free through the link in the description. I'm telling you this now because I want you to finish this video with a concrete tool in your hands. To get it right away, just click the link in the description, head over to my site, and drop your email. You'll receive the guide in your inbox a few minutes later. But I don't want to take up any more of your time. Let's get back to the video. The first change Thomas made was to the structure of his meals. Not what he ate, but the order in which he ate it. Every meal during those 2 weeks began with either a protein, a fat, or a non-starchy vegetable, always. He did not touch the bread first. He did not start with the rice or the pasta. He started with a few bites of chicken, or a handful of walnuts, or a portion of steamed broccoli. Only after eating that first component did he move on to whatever carbohydrate was on his plate. This strategy has a growing body of clinical evidence behind it, and the mechanism is well understood. When carbohydrates are consumed on an empty stomach, glucose enters the bloodstream rapidly. The spike is steep and fast, but when protein or fat is consumed first, 2 things happen simultaneously. Gastric emptying slows, the rate at which the stomach releases its contents into the small intestine decreases, which means glucose absorption is stretched out over a longer window. And the secretion of GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, one of the most important incretin hormones in metabolic regulation, is stimulated. GLP-1 signals the pancreas to release insulin in a glucose-dependent, measured way, and it suppresses glucagon, the counter-regulatory hormone that instructs the liver to release stored glucose. The post-meal spike is meaningfully lower. The insulin response is proportionate rather than reactive. Thomas reported that within 4 days of changing nothing else, his energy levels after meals shifted noticeably. The heavy, foggy fatigue that had been a fixture of his early afternoons for years began to lift. This is a well-documented subjective correlate of reduced post-meal glycemic spikes. When the glucose curve flattens, the insulin surge that follows also flattens, and the reactive drop in blood sugar that produces post-meal fatigue is significantly diminished. He also added 2 simple pre-meal habits during that first week. 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar diluted in a large glass of water, consumed approximately 15 minutes before his main meal of the day, and half a teaspoon of cinnamon stirred into his morning coffee. These 2 additions target blood sugar through entirely different mechanisms, which is part of what makes them effective in combination. Acetic acid, the active compound in apple cider vinegar, inhibits alpha amylase, the enzyme in the small intestine responsible for breaking down complex carbohydrates into absorbable simple sugars. When this enzyme is partially inhibited, carbohydrate digestion slows, glucose enters the bloodstream more gradually. The pancreatic insulin response is less abrupt. Several randomized controlled trials have demonstrated measurable reductions in post-meal glucose following pre-meal acetic acid consumption. Cinnamon, specifically Ceylon cinnamon, works at the receptor level rather than the digestive level. Its primary active compound, cinnamaldehyde, improves the sensitivity of insulin receptors on muscle and liver cells, meaning those cells become more responsive to the insulin signal and more efficient at clearing glucose from the bloodstream. The 2 habits together address the glucose curve from 2 different angles. One slows the rate of glucose entry, the other improves the efficiency of glucose clearance. I want to introduce you to a woman named Carol, 67 years old, from Tucson, Arizona. Carol had been told her blood sugar was elevated for 4 consecutive years. Each visit, her physician advised her to watch her diet, lose some weight, and return in 6 months. Her fasting glucose had climbed steadily from 110 to 118 to 127. She described the experience as watching a slow train approaching and having somehow forgotten that stepping off the tracks was an option. Carol's frustration was not a failure of willpower. It was a failure of framework. She was making small, isolated adjustments with no underlying understanding of the mechanisms involved, waiting 6 months for feedback that was too delayed and too abstract to sustain motivation. When Carol learned about meal sequencing and the pre-meal habits Thomas had used, she implemented them within a week. Her results over the following 2 weeks mirrored his closely, for reasons that are entirely predictable once you understand the biology. The second major change Thomas made was one that surprised him, and it is the change that I find most underappreciated in conventional discussions of blood sugar management. He overhauled his sleep. In the months before his diagnosis, Thomas was averaging between 5 and 6 hours of sleep per night. He woke frequently. He lay awake for long stretches before falling asleep. He had attributed all of this to aging and accepted it as fixed. It was not fixed, and it was not trivial. Poor sleep is among the most potent and most under-recognized drivers of elevated blood sugar in adults over 60. The mechanism is direct and well documented. Sleep deprivation elevates cortisol, the primary glucocorticoid stress hormone. Cortisol instructs the liver to increase hepatic glucose output, releasing stored glycogen into the bloodstream regardless of recent food intake. It simultaneously suppresses insulin sensitivity in peripheral tissues. The result is higher fasting glucose and a reduced capacity to clear glucose effectively throughout the day. A single night of sleep restricted to 5 hours or fewer has been shown in controlled studies to raise fasting glucose by 10 to 20 points in otherwise healthy adults. In older adults with existing insulin resistance, the effect is amplified. Thomas set a fixed bedtime of 10:30, maintained it without exception, including on weekends, and eliminated screens and stimulating content in the hour before sleep. He kept his bedroom cool and dark, and he began taking a short, slow walk outside in the early evening, a habit whose value for sleep is twofold. Exposure to natural light in the evening hours helps anchor circadian rhythm by reinforcing the body's internal timing signals, and the mild muscle contraction from walking pulls glucose directly into muscle cells through a non-insulin-mediated pathway, reducing post-dinner blood sugar and indirectly supporting a lower fasting reading the following morning. Within the first week, Thomas's reported sleep quality improved substantially. Within 10 days, his morning fasting readings had dropped from 142 to approximately 128. 14 points in 7 days from dietary sequencing and sleep improvement alone. Robert is 71 years old, a recently retired engineer from the Pacific Northwest. Where Thomas approached the 2-week protocol intuitively, Robert approached it analytically. He tracked his fasting glucose and his 2-hour post-dinner glucose every day. He logged his sleep duration, his step count, and every meal in a paper notebook. The value of this kind of self-monitoring is well established in behavioral medicine. Measurement creates accountability. Accountability creates consistency, and consistency is the variable that most reliably determines outcomes in lifestyle-based metabolic intervention. Robert's data confirmed what the research predicts. The nights following fragmented or shortened sleep produced fasting readings that were consistently 8 to 15 points higher than the nights following adequate sleep. The evenings following high-carbohydrate meals produced post-dinner readings that were 30 to 40 points higher than evenings following the same meal with protein-first sequencing. The feedback loop that had been invisible to him became visible. The choices became legible in a way they had not been before. The third change, the one that Thomas added in the second week, and that both Carol and Robert integrated shortly after, was post-meal movement. Specifically, a 10 to 15-minute walk within 30 minutes of finishing each meal. The timing is not incidental, it is mechanistically precise. Post-meal glucose typically peaks between 30 and 90 minutes after eating. During that window, if the body is sedentary, circulating glucose has limited sites for disposal. It must wait for insulin-mediated uptake in muscle and liver cells. But skeletal muscle contraction activates GLUT4 transporters, glucose transport proteins embedded in muscle cell membranes, through a pathway that is entirely independent of insulin. Walking after a meal essentially opens additional channels for glucose to leave the bloodstream and enter the muscles, blunting the post-meal spike directly and reducing the total area under the glucose curve. Studies using continuous glucose monitors have documented reductions of 15 to 30% in post-meal glucose peaks from 10-minute post-meal walks compared to seated rest. Thomas walked around his block, sometimes to the end of his street and back. On poor weather days, back and forth through his living room. The distance was irrelevant. The timing and the consistency were everything. 3 walks per day, every day, for 14 days. By the end of week 2, his fasting glucose had reached 102. Carol, similarly, found the post-dinner walk became the most motivating part of her day, not for any intrinsic pleasure in walking, but because it gave her something she had not had in 4 years of managing a worsening number, a direct, immediate, tangible sense of agency over her own biology. She was not waiting 6 months for a lab result. She was feeling the difference the following morning. Robert's notebook told the complete story. Over 14 days, his fasting glucose dropped by 33 points. His average 2-hour post-dinner readings fell from 155 to 117. His average nightly sleep duration increased by over an hour, and he noted almost as a footnote that the chronic stiffness he had experienced in his knees every morning for several years was significantly better. He had not expected that, but it follows directly from the biology. Chronic hyperglycemia drives systemic inflammation through multiple pathways, including the formation of advanced glycation end products and the upregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokines. When blood sugar comes down, that inflammatory burden decreases across the entire body. The joints, the vasculature, the brain, the kidneys, all of them are downstream of blood sugar regulation in ways that most people are never clearly told. This is the finding that matters most. Thomas did not set out to improve his joint health, his sleep quality, his afternoon energy, or his mental clarity. He set out to lower a number on a blood test. What the research consistently shows, and what Thomas, Carol, and Robert each experienced, is that blood sugar regulation is not an isolated variable. It is a central axis around which an extraordinary range of physiological functions revolve. When you improve it, the benefits are systemic. They are whole body, 3 changes, meal sequencing and composition, sleep as a non-negotiable clinical priority, post-meal movement, timed with precision. This is the protocol. It is mechanistically sound, it is evidence-based, and it is accessible to virtually any older adult, regardless of fitness level, dietary preference, or prior health history. It does not require perfection. It requires consistency, and consistency, over 14 days, is sufficient to produce results that are both measurable and meaningful. And hey, if you made it all the way here, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit the like button to let me know this was worth your time, and leave a comment below. Tell me what country you're watching from. Seriously, I read every single one, and it means a lot to see how far this community reaches. You know what the problem is with diabetes and high blood sugar? Most people find out way too late, and by the time they do, they have no idea where to even start. That's why I decided to create a free guide. It's called the Glucose Paradox, and inside you'll find everything you wish you'd known sooner. I'll explain how blood sugar actually works, and why your body sometimes reacts the exact opposite way you'd expect. That's why it's called a paradox. I've also included concrete habits you can start changing right now, even if you know zero about nutrition or medicine. It's free. You can download it in a second. And it might be the single most useful thing you do for your health today. Just click the link in the description to head to the site, drop your email, and get the guide sent straight to you. Don't put this off.